So welcome back. In our last time together, we talked about this dramatic discrepancy between the partnership-based approach to literacy in Hazara, Afghanistan, which resulted in, on average, 136 and a half mosque-based literacy programs starting per year over 3 years. And in comparison, the top-down implementation of literacy programs coming only from the power brokering partner of the government resulted in about 4 programs per year on average. So we left last time asking the question, well, why is this? What accounts for it? So let's dive in and take a look. Because not only was there a dramatic increase in literacy programs, but there was also significant cost savings. There was 10% of the cost using a partnership model. The cost per program was 0.27% of the cost of a top-down only program, and the magnitude of programs produced was 3,650% higher in the partnership model. Not only that, cost savings, multiplication, and impact, we have a reduction in under 5 mortality of about 46% over the course of the period following the implementation of these women-only workshops and the literacy programs that resulted from them. So let's begin to look at the why. What went behind that process? So we've said from the beginning, the main objective of your DNP project is to actualize health transformation, that you have a vision for a better future state than things are today in your current practice area. And you want that transformation to be sustainable, to outlive the life of your DNP project, to go from one unit of practice to another, to involve all of the relevant parties and be just, and also be innovative, to do things better tomorrow than they were done today. So there are 3 levels of scale in the SEED scale model. And in the model for sustained transformation, they've been called local success and learning, exemplar and experimentation, and systems for expansion and collaboration. So we're going to look at each of these in turn, see how they applied in Afghanistan, and begin to think about how they might be relevant for our projects. So the first one we'll look at is scale 1, or local success and learning. So what is local success and learning? This is a schematic from Future Generations that depicts local success and learning as a process that's happening in a discrete area where we're reflecting on our practice and our experience, and we're changing what we're doing. We're going through that learning cycle, those 7 steps that we talked about, setting, building capacity, setting vision, action, acting, and then revising and going back through that cycle again and again and again. So it's a process. Once you go through all of those 7 steps, you have essentially accomplished the first part of scale 1. You've become a center, an area, a context that has learned. Because if you are doing that 7th step and doing the reflection and revision, you've learned. You've learned from your experience and your implementation. And you've also been successful. You may not have conquered world hunger, eradicated measles, or decreased the length of stay on your unit by 50%. But part of that process of engaging in this learning is a success. Even if you haven't had dramatic, hard health outcomes yet, by bringing partners together, mobilizing their energy and insight, engaging in this learning, you have been successful. And we'll see how that local success and the small baby steps are cumulative and can add to one another. So in the original work on SEED scale, scale is actually an acronym. So it's a concept of expansion, but it's also an acronym. And so scale 1 stood for successful change as a learning experience. And so that's what we have been talking about, that in one particular context, you've gone through the action cycle and you've learned something, and now you're taking that experience back into your practice. So in Hazara, this happened as the woman with an 8th grade education went to a woman's only workshop with her mother-in-law, had the idea of a way to use her literacy skills in her community, and she began to engage as an instructor at the mosque and in partnership with the NGO who provided some technical expertise to support her work. But as she began that process and began to reflect on the themes, the topics, the issues that were at hand, the logistical challenges, that became a learning experience that then she was able to build on when other villages started to come to her and ask for this program to be taken to their villages. So with that idea of the local success and learning, let's look at scale 2, which is where you have a site, a context, a practice that has become an exemplar, that does have a strength, and becomes a site for experimentation. So this graphic from Future Generations depicts that process. That scale 2 is where there's been success in one area, and in this example from Hazara, the literacy program in the first village became successful so that word began to spread to neighboring villages. But what happened when that program was taken from village 1 to village 2 is the same program wasn't just picked up and inserted into the new context. Rather, there was knowledge about the local conditions of village 2, because even though they're relatively geographically proximate as the bird flies, there's very rough terrain, profoundly inclement weather for 6 months out of the year in the wintertime, and so you get very discrete subcultures at these villages oftentimes. And so it wasn't sufficient to just take what happened at 1 and plop it into 2. Rather, what was successful at 1 was taken to the second village as an opportunity to continue experimenting and learning from action, so that the second workshop was appropriate to that second local context. So you can see we move from scale 1, which is a local success and learning experience, to scale 2, where it's now moving geographically and it's moving in its customization to the specific needs in the other context. So with this concept of a site or area or unit being an exemplar, someone that's been strong, and then experiments actively in partnership with a second scale-up site, let's look at the acronym behind this concept. So scale 2 in the original seed scale model stood for Self-Help Center for Action Learning and Experimentation. So it was conceived of as a resource for other places that wanted to adopt what it had been doing. So it was a place to help other locations learn, experiment, and customize. So there again, you have the scale. You're going from one to another or many. And in Hazara, this happened as the first mosque literacy program in village 1 went to 2, and within 6 months, it had spread to 12 other villages. And over time, this one woman with an 8th grade education who started the literacy movement worked to mentor other literacy trainers. And as they began to spread outside of their district, across the significant valley on the mountains, the one site that started this movement was a place for others to come and learn about mosque-based literacy. And as a result, the word continued to spread throughout the region. So let's take a look at scale 3. Scale 3 is more systematic. It's focused on systems for collaboration, adaptive learning, and extension or expansion. So in the earlier example of scale 2, we went from village 1 to village 2, village 1 to village 3, 4, 5, 12, up through that district. as that expansion became larger and larger, the original site would have less and less capacity to host all of the neighboring villages coming to it to learn. And so that first literacy program had to create systems. That one literacy program couldn't mentor all the others. And so they designed ways to do training of trainers and learning between proximate mosque literacy programs, so that it moved from just the one success in scale 1 to small geographic surrounding successes at other programs to an entire system, where by the time you finished in year 3 and had 468 other literacy programs at other mosques, the original initiator was overseeing 12 regional trainers who would then go to these surrounding mosque programs. So they had to develop systems for the main leader to collaborate with these other other mosque programs. They also had to have systems of adaptive learning. What worked at Mosque 1 wasn't necessarily going to work at Mosque 2. And so when this intervention went from place 1 to place 2, it had to adapt and be customized. And in that process of being locally specific, it becomes much more powerful because, again, you've begun the process with the 4 principles for sustained change, where you're having collaboration, dialogue, discussion, using data to guide your decision making, so that adaptive learning becomes a mechanism for expansion because it's locally relevant, it's locally specific, it fits my perceived need, and it responds to my voice and my input. So that process is scale 3. Which is systems for collaboration and expansion in our model of sustained transformation. So the acronym in SEED scale is Systems for Collaboration, Adaptive Learning, and Extension. So again, the concept is we're moving from just being an exemplar where others are coming to learn from us, or we're taking our success to them, to an entire system. And so what you saw in the way I laid this out is scale 1 leads to scale 2, leads to scale 3 in a very linear process. But in reality, this process could begin at any step along the way. You could have a government declaration. You could have a national accrediting body setting a standard. You could have a hospital administrator create an agenda or a vision for the organization. So starting at a very high level of system and then moving backwards. So each of these levels of scale can play off of each other. A process of transformation could be started at any level of scale 1, 2, or 3, and then be shared upwards or backwards in the scale process. So let's take a moment now to just recap where we've been. We've suggested that in the midst of looking at our current state and looking ahead and envisioning a better future state, one of the key processes to get us toward transformation, to get us to that better future state, is having a roadmap. And so we've worked our way through this model for sustained transformation based on SEED scale, begun with a catalyst, looked at 4 principles for sustained transformation and talked about them in great detail. Then we talked about the systematic process for transformation, that transformation isn't an accident. It is a systematically planned process of taking where we are and moving to a better future state. And when we are successful in our local implementation and our learning process, then we can begin to scale up and expand beyond where we are. So this transformation requires human energy, requires input and collaboration in order to reach an innovative, sustainable, and just better future. So, best wishes in your transformation process in using this model. Have a great week.